This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market shares extended gains into a seventh session today. We saw MSCI's index of emerging market shares climbing 0.2%, hitting its highest in 3 months and on track for its longest winning streak since April last year. Now, investors are certainly warming up to the idea of a swift global economic recovery, especially after data from the U.S. showed a fall in the jobs rate. Now, despite that rally in riskier assets today, we saw South Africa's JSE little change. In Nigeria, an almost 2% climb in MTN did lift the bourse almost 8% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show, we'll be looking at a proposed plan that Nigeria hopes will sustain its economy. Disappointment amongst investors after news that global oil output cuts won't go beyond the end of July. And one of the 7 natural wonders of the world is back in business. Well, our starting point tonight is in Nigeria, where the government is set to spend about $6 billion to fund its new economic sustainability program. The plan comes in the wake of COVID-19, which has paralyzed economic activities in the West African nation. Now, the ongoing global health crisis is causing a loss of income for households and businesses, as well as a huge revenue setback for the government. According to the IMF, Nigeria's economy is expected to shrink by 3.4% this year. At the same time, Africa's biggest economy could face a recession lasting until 2021. Well, Deji Badmus joins us in Lagos with more on this economic plan. Great to have you with us, Deji, today. Firstly, do we know the highlights of the draft sustainability plan that, of course, was put together by Nigeria's Economic Sustainability Committee?
Well, Uche, the draft plan has actually not been released by that committee headed by the Vice President. As a matter of fact, the committee had consultation until late last week when it met with members of Parliament. So the expectation is that the draft would be ready, and of course, it still would not be made public until it is presented to the President for approval before we're likely going to see anything come out. But what we have seen over the course of this period since that committee was set up in April is that we know, for instance, that the committee intends to ensure that people do not lose jobs. As a matter of fact, that more jobs are created. We know that the committee is also planning, part of the economic plan now is to create mass housing, for instance, boost agriculture and enhance revenue, both oil and non-oil revenue. So, and the Vice President has made it very clear that, look, the plan is going to be bold, ambitious, and quite aggressive, and that, of course, there would be some pains there. And so everyone is expecting to see that plan, and I believe in the coming days the plan will be made public. It's a plan that this government, the current administration, has touted as one that would change the course of this country from this very difficult period now. And let's not also forget, Uche, that that plan is not just for now, but it's a plan that will anchor the government's economic program now between now and 2023 when the current president would leave office.
Well, Deji, this plan all sounds very good, but it is one of the larger stimulus plans we've seen on the continent so far. The government says it will spend an estimated $6 billion to fund this new economic plan. Now, given the volatility in oil prices that we've seen, where does Nigeria's government plan to source the financing to fund this plan?
Well, the government has made it very clear that it intends to borrow. In fact, the government plans to borrow around 22.7 billion between now and 2023. So the bulk of the money, of course, would be coming from borrowing because obviously, as you've pointed out, the price, oil market quite volatile. The country is not expecting much from that area. In terms of non-oil revenue now, of course, part of the plan is to expand revenue sources in that area, but we do not expect that revenue sources coming from non-oil revenue now would be enough to drive this plan. And that's the reason why the government is banking on borrowing. As you're aware, of course, the Parliament has already granted approval to the executive now to borrow. For instance, last week, $5.13 billion. And going forward, I think we're still going to see more borrowing because what the government plans to borrow, as I said, is in the region of $22 billion to drive its economic program, especially its focus on infrastructure. Uche?
Well, let's shift focus now to the impact, of course, the coronavirus has had on the country. Now, the Statistics Agency just released new numbers. It says 79% of incomes decreased in March. That's what they found. Also, 42% of Nigerians became unemployed during the coronavirus period. Give us a glimpse into the extent of the impact that this pandemic has had on consumers and, of course, business activity in Nigeria.
Uche, it's huge. I must tell you, it's really huge. People have lost jobs. We still do not have the numbers yet. I think things will become clearer in the coming weeks. But the truth is that, look, nothing has been moving. Take, for instance, the aviation industry. The aviation sector has been down since March. Of course, the government says that the sector would become operational June the 21st. But then it's also saying that flights would have to carry just between 50 and 60% passenger capacity. So that's a challenge. You look at the aviation industry itself, apart from the airline operators, think of the other people who render, essential services now to that sector. Millions of them, all of them at home at the moment, not doing anything. Not just that, quite a number of small and medium enterprises have actually collapsed, so to speak, because they've not been able to work, and is the reason why the Central Bank of Nigeria, for instance, in the first instance now, has pushed out 50 billion naira in support of small and medium enterprises, even though everyone is saying that money would not be enough, that you would need a doubling of that amount to be able to save a lot of these small and medium enterprises from to save them from total collapse. Because the fact is that SMEs are actually the engine room of this economy. They provide the highest number of jobs, and that's the reason why the CBN had to push out that palliatives, and more is still being expected now from this committee led by the Vice President. So it's been a very tough period, Uche. Let's not talk about the oil industry that has gone bust now. A lot of jobs have been lost there. And it's the reason why you see the government is coming under enormous pressure and has decided to reopen the economy, even when COVID-19 cases are still going up. So it's a tough one, not just for individuals now, even the government too is finding it difficult. Because, for instance, the government has to raise money from taxes. People are not able to pay taxes. That's a problem too. So it's a very tough one for the economy, and nothing paints the picture better than what the Statistics Office came out with the last time. And I think by the next, when the Statistics Office now releases the next figures, I think we'll get a clearer picture of how much damage COVID-19 has actually had on this economy, Uche.
Well, we are certainly watching the progress there. Many thanks for your insights, Deji. That was Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos. Well, let's stay in Nigeria. And speaking of flights in the country, domestic airlines are expected to resume operations on June 21st. But flights will only be able to carry about 50 to 70% of total passenger capacity. Well, CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on how these new coronavirus restrictions will affect the country's aviation sector.
Over 120 aircraft have been grounded at airports across Nigeria for months now as a result of the country's COVID-19 lockdown. For an aviation industry player like Gabriel Olowo, who heads a body of aviation experts in Nigeria, the announcement of the resumption of operations is a very cheering news.
We've been strategizing, especially on how not to spread the virus. From all stakeholders, the airport, the ticketing office, the customs, immigration, and all that are involved, in the value chain. We've been talking. And I think we have templates on ground. What we need to do now is to walk the talk. Let's now see how ready we are to experiment the challenges of COVID.
Part of Nigeria's coronavirus mitigation strategy is a directive by the government that every flight must not exceed between 50 to 70% passenger capacity to allow for social distancing.
The demand of social distancing on board, where today's passenger is asking for the cheapest fare, you might need 70, 80, 90% load factor to break even. If you're going to need 80% load factor to break even, and social distancing demands that the aeroplane will be 50% at the same cost of doing business and at the same tariff that you are used to, it's not going to be possible.
There's every likelihood that fares may go up when flight operations eventually resume. But for a frequent flyer like Tony, fares are the least of his problems.
Yes, I'm more bothered about safety because I'm one of the frequent flyers, and I'd rather my safety comes first before the cost. That's the biggest issue we have. But I feel government should not leave it to the airlines alone. I feel government should come to their aid. That's the only way you can make the airlines be able to survive this time we're in.
Aviation has been one of the sectors most impacted by Nigeria's coronavirus restrictions. Virtually all airlines have placed their employees on indefinite leave without pay. And even when flight operations begin later this month, it is certain that not all the employees will be recalled to work.
Because of what has happened and because of the fear that people have been developed in people, it is going to take them time before they begin to think of even traveling. And even if you are going to travel again, it is going to require some procedures. They might start asking you to bring certificate. They might ask you to, do social distances. And because of all those, protocols, some people might decide to say, I'm not even going to travel now.
The Nigerian Aviation Ministry estimates that for every day this lockdown has lasted, the cost on the country's aviation industry runs into almost $2 million daily. And even if airlines receive government support, it's still uncertain if they will find a viable financial path forward. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And staying with aviation matters, South African Airways business rescue practitioners have now asked for another extension to publish their final rescue plan. This time it is due to unions who are requesting more time. The plan was supposed to be published on June 8th. Now, should the extension be granted, it will be made public on June 15th. With the details, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola.
The business plan was leaked on Friday and called on government to raise in the region of around $1.2 billion to settle the debts and capitalize a new airline. It's understood that that price tag was something that the government and specifically the Public Enterprises Minister, Pravin Gordhan, balked at. And he actually told the practitioners to go back to the drawing board. We do understand that the practitioners have had a meeting with the SAA Creditors Committee, but not with the Employees Committee. On that draft plan, the practitioners, of course, have now requested an extension to the 15th of June to revise the rescue plan and resubmit it. There's also no more news on the alternative plans being developed between the unions and the Public Enterprises Minister. Some analysts have suggested, though, that one of the better options is to wind up or wind down the airline, as this will provide staff with a better deal in terms of retrenchment packages. It's also understood that the unions aren't overjoyed by this latest delay. Incidentally, June 15 is the day that the local airlines start limited domestic services between Johannesburg, Durban and Cape Town. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now turn our attention to some of our corporate headlines today. Oil and gas giant BP is expected to cut around 10,000 jobs as part of efforts to deal with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, demand for fuel has plummeted this year. As a result, oil prices have tumbled amid drastic production cuts by producer nations. And shareholders and global environmental activists are calling for the ousting of directors at Africa's biggest bank by assets, Standard Bank Group. The call comes amid re-election of 7 non-executive directors with ties to fossil fuel companies. Now, Standard Bank is set to hold its virtual AGM on June 26th. Meanwhile, Ghana's National Communications Authority plans to implement a set of policies to reduce the dominance of MTN in the country's telecoms market. The move forms part of other specific measures to be implemented to promote healthy competition in the sector, as well as secure a much better pricing policy for consumers and facilitate a sound regulatory regime. And finally, British Airways has threatened to dismiss all of its pilots in a row over redundancies with the British Airline Pilots Association. Now, the airline says it could consider firing its 4,300 pilots and only retire on individual contracts unless an agreement can be reached on new employment terms. And that was a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let us take a short break now, still coming up on the show. A dent in investor confidence as the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange records zero trading. And online services are fast becoming popular in Africa amidst COVID-19 restrictions.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to Tanzania now, where zero trading of equities at the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange has now sparked debate over the bourse after the bourse reported no activity at its counters. Now, the stock exchange is reeling from losses ignited by the coronavirus pandemic. Analysts say it is unusual for an established stock exchange to have a trading volume of zero. However, the bourse CEO, Moremi Marwa, says the incident is a mismatch in share prices between offers and bids from investors. Well, let's discuss all that further. Daniel Kijo is in Dar es Salaam. He joins us now via Skype. Great to have you with us, Daniel. Now, of course, there's been a lot of debate, as we mentioned, around the fact that the bourse saw zero trading of equities alone at the exchange on Friday. What could that mean, Daniel? What was the conclusion of that debate? Because it is unusual.
Yes, Uche, it is unusual, and it is the very first time that the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange experienced this. The stock exchange has 27 listed companies, and basically what this means is that last Friday, the buyers and sellers did not see eye to eye. The buyers had a certain range that they were willing to pay for stock, and sellers wanted a certain amount for them to sell their stock. So indeed, it's also important to understand that there were offers made. So it's not like when you say zero trading, there were no offers made. It just so happens that indeed they did not see eye to eye, and there was no deals done. So this is indeed the first time it has set some sort of historical precedent, but for individual stock, it has happened before, specific portfolios, but never for the whole market. Now, people are not really aware that just the day before the zero trading day, the market only traded $800, which again, for a big market, as you said, in the region, this was not a positive trend. However, the cat is now out of the bag that the stock exchange has been struggling for a while, and this perhaps is because 65% or so of the investors in the stock exchange, in the market, are foreign. So, having 65% of investors not locally based and not in country, the investors look at media, they look at news, they look at trends globally, and somehow, obviously, to COVID-19, they felt a bit hesitant to trade or spend as much as we've seen. So indeed, it is sort of like a precedent, a dangerous precedent for the stock market, but it doesn't necessarily mean the market cannot recover.
Well, of course, we know the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange is not one of the most liquid on the continent. As you mentioned, it had been struggling before. But give us a sense, a clearer picture of how this pandemic has impacted the bourse in terms of activity, in terms of investor sentiment. What are the market trends showing us right now?
Like I said, Uche, the day before the zero trading at the market saw only $800 being traded for the whole market, not even in specific portfolios. Now, this clearly shows that, based on some of the experts I've talked to, that the appetite has gone down, especially foreign investors' appetite has gone down. And indeed, COVID-19 has impacted people. Sellers are obviously selling at a higher price, and buyers are not willing to pay at this higher price. Now, perhaps for foreign investors, as I said, 65%, a large market of the percentage of the market has foreign investors. Perhaps they're not comfortable due to the COVID-19 pandemic hitting not just Tanzania, but the whole world. And maybe perhaps they're waiting to see how the economy will recover. But this is not, it's important to also note that this is not a Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange issue alone. The stock exchange markets are affected all over the world, and even the biggest ones like the New York Stock Exchange and London as well. So experts warn that this could be a precursor to a recession. Recession talks are being discussed all over the world. So for Tanzania as well, we're not an island, so perhaps that could be an indicator of that as well. But capital markets could be reflecting the state of the general economy.
And on that note, talking about the general economy, let's talk about business activity. Given the fact that we didn't see the city of Dar es Salaam go on lockdown compared to other African cities, it didn't implement a curfew. One would assume that business activity was not that heavily impacted by the pandemic, maybe not as much as the tourism sector, for example. And also we're getting unconfirmed reports that the president is declaring the country coronavirus free now. Give us a sense of what has happened with business activity in the country.
Well, Uche, the pandemic has affected every single country in the world and perhaps every person in the world. But it is different for other countries because indeed Tanzania, unlike its neighbors, did not lock down its biggest city, commercial city, Dar es Salaam. But obviously it has had impacts, whether direct or indirect, on its economy. For instance, you touched on tourism. Tourism contributes 17.5% of Tanzania's GDP. It employs over 1 million people. Now, with planes not coming in, big hotels in Dar es Salaam have been, some of them closed down. Johari Rotana, it's a 5-star, recently launched, one of the biggest hotels in Dar es Salaam has been closed down, and many other hotels are suffering. So because business travelers are not coming in, conference centers are also being struggling during this time. So with no lockdown, but the advantages are because there was no lockdown, people are able to continue to earn some form of income. People are able to leave home, get on buses, get lunch in the afternoon, go try and sell, and then go back home. So buyers, for instance, public transport operators were able to get money. People who are providing meals for workers were able to get money, et cetera, et cetera. Businesses found a way to do trading and business online by using digital means, and couriers like border borders and motorcycles that usually transport goods from here to there were still being able to transport goods from one point to another. So business churn in Dar es Salaam was still able to go on because there was no lockdown of people being indoors or curfews like other markets. But the real numbers and impacts of COVID-19 on the economy are yet to come. And the stance of the government, based on what it sees as a state of the economy, will be more clear as we head towards June 10th, when the government will present its budget for the coming year. So this will show us what the government is thinking and what it feels the economy needs. But the World Bank recently has said that it expected the economy to grow, to grow by 6.9, but now it won't grow. It will only grow by 2.5%. So the World Bank is saying there will be serious effects from COVID-19 for Tanzania's economy. But as it stands, we're waiting to see what the government stance will be.
Well, we're certainly watching. Always good to have you on the show, Daniel. That is Daniel Kijo in Dar es Salaam, joining us there via Skype. Now, in the battle to curb the spread of the coronavirus, strict restrictions on physical contact have become our new normal. They've dramatically changed the way we socialize and the way we do business. Online services have now become an important part of our daily lives, and for some, for businesses, a matter of survival. Here in Africa, the new realities that the pandemic presents could be the much needed push towards becoming a digital economy. Let's explore that.
Stuck in the house? Bored? Hungry? For most, the social isolation at the peak of coronavirus lockdown measures forced us to rely on online services for the most basic needs: our food, entertainment, and as a tool for interacting socially or doing business. Well, here in Africa, internet penetration still remains low. But it turns out COVID-19 could be helping to accelerate a change in attitudes towards online services. The debate amongst stakeholders is whether the sudden need for safety and cleanliness could be a game changer for Africa's e-commerce and fintech platforms. According to players in Africa's e-commerce and fintech space, they are seeing higher levels of consumer adoption. Popular online marketplace Jumia reported that demand for groceries and essentials grew fourfold in the first quarter compared to last year, with customer and seller interest spiking. Tech firm Okra, which is Africa's first API that essentially connects bank accounts to various apps, has now seen a 175% rise in demand since March 2020, as more companies digitize their services due to COVID-19. In May this year, a survey by MasterCard found that 70% of respondents in the Middle East and Africa now say they are using some form of contactless payment and plan to continue to do so post-COVID-19. Daniel Yu founded SocoWatch, a B2B e-commerce platform in East Africa that supplies informal shops and kiosks in low-income communities with various products. He says he's now signing up more shop partners and reporting a higher share of stock in local shops compared to traditional suppliers.
We've already seen a significant growth in our volumes over the past 2 months. At the same time, though, we have seen some struggles with shops in different countries, in different communities. For example, in Uganda and Rwanda, which were under strict lockdown for most of April, we found that shops were actually decreasing their average purchases as a result of the drop in incomes in those communities. At the same time, what we've actually seen is even when shops are dropping their purchases overall, we as a supplier, SocoWatch as an e-commerce provider, their company, have actually increased our share of supply within those businesses.
An interesting twist is that SocoWatch is now using its network of shop owners as well as its technology to distribute e-vouchers to families in need during this pandemic.
So families are able to receive a SMS voucher that notifies them that they have $15 to go spend at a local retail shop to buy essential goods. When the families go to those are stores that are already using SocoWatch's technology and platform to get the goods for their shop. And they're able to actually verify and redeem that Soco cash that's being spent at their shop.
While Africa's consumers have begun to rely more on digital tools during this pandemic, even after lockdown measures ease, have those services become important enough to engineer a massive shift in social behavior on the continent and revolutionize its e-commerce and fintech space?
I know people have seen the miracle and the magic of tech and what it's done, but I think it's too preposterous to think that it's going to overwhelm and overhaul industries that have been there. Well, that might actually happen, but I don't see that in the foreseeable future. Just looking at the trends, for instance, let's look at example of e-commerce, for instance, and the Jumias, for example, and what they've been able to do. I think that in itself has demonstrated that there is room for that particular service to exist, and I think perhaps we might see more different flavors of the same tech going forward. There's another open space, especially on the unbanked population or part of the population that is still unresolved.
With physical distancing measures likely to remain in place in different forms, the world has shifted towards a new reality. No one is sure what the future could look like, and that could mean an abundance of post-pandemic opportunities for Africa's digital economy. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN Africa.
Well, let's shift focus now. The Bank of Uganda has reduced its benchmark lending rate to 7% from 8% as announced last April. The central bank's monetary policy committee eased the key lending rate to support its economy, citing the continued adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more on that report.
The Governor Bank of Uganda says as the coronavirus pandemic continues to spread, it's having negative social and economic effects on the economy. The central bank says economic activity has contracted by 4% since April 2020, and all indicators show a continuous shrinkage in the coming months.
The COVID-19 pandemic, extreme weather, and volatility in the global financial markets could weigh down Uganda's balance of payments, potentially destabilizing the domestic foreign exchange market and dampening economic growth.
The central bank projects that household expenditure, investments, exports, and imports are expected to decline this year. And this has forced the Bank of Uganda to downgrade projected growth to a range of 2.5 to 3.5% from the April 2020 forecast of 3 to 4%.
The strength of economic recovery will depend in part on how Uganda will be able to open up for economic activity safely, and in particular, how effectively the public will comply with social distancing rules.
Uganda is gradually easing the lockdown measures put in place to contain the spread of the pandemic. But economic analysts say a picture painted by Bank of Uganda shows a gloomy future and more difficult times to come.
Reading between the lines, you see that according to the central bank, growth is going to be very, very slow for the remainder of the calendar year. It's likely that we shall continue to experience very limited inflows into the economy.
According to the monetary policy statement, public transport measures to contain the pandemic will temporarily increase transport costs in months ahead, but the overall risks to the inflation outlook appear to be on the downside. The central bank believes the economic slowdown will be severe in the second quarter of 2020, but a gradual recovery is expected to set in during the third and fourth quarters, boosted by the easing in the monetary policy. However, local entrepreneurs argue that revising taxes downwards will have a significant impact on their businesses as opposed to reducing the lending rates.
I think many businesses, especially the small businesses, even the big ones, are looking forward to that opportunity or that statement when the government says there's been maybe a tax waiver as opposed to a tax deferral, so that they're able to reorganize their cash flows, be able to retain employees as opposed to having them leave the organizations, which also has a ripple effect on the economy.
But the central bank insists it will maintain an adequate supply of liquidity in the domestic markets to encourage lending by financial institutions to households and businesses. Michael Balekesi, GTN, Kampala, Uganda.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, but still to come on the show. Disappointment amongst investors after news that record oil output cuts won't go beyond the end of July. And the Italian city of Milan lays out plans to keep its city clean.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
And here's a quick recap of today's top headlines. Sudan has begun talks with the International Monetary Fund on a non-funded program that could pave the way for international financial support. Until now, Khartoum has been unable to tap the IMF or the World Bank for support. The country is still listed by the United States as a state sponsor of terrorism, and it has $1.3 billion of IMF arrears. And the United National Special Mission in Libya has welcomed the acceptance from Libyan leaders to resume the 5+5 military talks. The UN was pursuing 3 tracks to end the conflict in Libya through military, economic and political negotiations. On Monday, Tripoli forces advanced on the strategic city of Sirte, rejecting a truce which was put forward by Egypt. And finally, members and supporters of South Africa's opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, have joined the ongoing global anti-racism demonstrations. The protesters gathered outside the United States Embassy in Pretoria to condemn the killing of George Floyd. The black man whose death in police custody has set off a wave of protests worldwide and ignited a debate about race and justice. And that's a recap on today's top headlines. Now, the worst U.S. downturn since the Great Depression is now officially a recession. That is according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. The world's biggest economy hit its peak in February and has since fallen into a downturn. That's as the ongoing coronavirus-related shutdowns tanked activity and brought an end to a record-long expansion that had lasted about 128 months. The U.S. added roughly 2.4 million jobs last month. That's after losing more than 22 million in March and April. Many forecasters expect economic output to begin growing again in the third quarter of the year. Meanwhile, oil prices crawled up marginally, giving up big early gains today. Investors were disappointed that a deal amongst major crude producers to extend record output cuts wouldn't go beyond the end of July. Now, we spoke to Jacob Greaves in Dubai for more details.
This extension should prolong a deal that's helped double crude prices over the last 2 months by taking around 10% of global supply off the market. Saudi Arabia and Russia are the two principal OPEC Plus members, seen as fundamental to helping get this extension over the line. Compliance for all OPEC Plus members has been a major talking point in the build-up to these negotiations. And the group has now demanded countries such as Iraq and Nigeria, who exceeded their quotas in May and June, compensate with additional cuts. However, Mexico, in the build-up to these talks, has said it couldn't further adjust production and has now said it won't be complying with the latest cuts. This decision comes with demand seen to be growing as global economies emerge from lockdown. If you just take OPEC, for instance, they're still yet to clear around 1 billion barrels of excess oil inventories amassed since mid-March. It's also unclear whether some major Gulf producers will continue with their additional cuts that aren't part of the deal. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and the UAE have made extra voluntary cuts of over 1.1 million barrels per day recently. Whilst oil prices have been boosted since the original record cuts were agreed in April, they are still a third lower than at the end of 2019. The US has welcomed the latest deal, but looking ahead, Russia and Saudi Arabia will likely face a fine balancing act. Countries such as Saudi Arabia need a healthy oil price for a balanced budget, but there is a major rise in oil prices. OPEC Plus could see a resurgence in rival US shale production. Jacob Greaves, CGN in Dubai.
Well, let's turn our attention now to China. Officials from the country's Hainan province have unveiled the next set of construction plans for building the island into a free trade port. CGTN reporter Marque has the story.
It's a free trade port for China and for the world. Officials from southern China's Hainan province unveiled outlines for building the island into a free trade port. Officials say lower tariffs and taxes, along with fewer restrictions, will underscore messages for future policies on foreign trade.
We'll implement key policies such as preferential treatment for business and personal income tax, upgraded offshore duty-free shopping policies, and zero tariffs on imported goods. We will significantly widen market access, improve the free trade account system, facilitate cross-border trade, investment, and capital flow.
Hainan has a traditional advantage in tourism and service industries, which China plans to enlarge by encouraging foreign investment in these sectors.
For foreign investors, we will apply the pre-establishment national treatment with Hainan Free Trade Port's exclusive negative list. For companies that fall into the tourism, services, and high-tech sectors, we will exempt the income tax for their overseas direct investment income.
As one of China's earliest ports to open up after the establishment of the PRC in 1949, Hainan's experiencing international trade and adjacency to the country's Guangzhou, Hong Kong and Macau Greater Bay Area have people wondering, will it pose a threat to the city of Hong Kong as a financial center and shopping mecca.
我们更要充分发挥海南
Hainan will give priority to trade and investment, will focus on developing tourism, modern services, and high-tech industries, so that the free trade port can have its unique strengths, and we can inject vitality into the development of global free trade ports. In this sense, the position of Hainan and Hong Kong will be different. Their priority areas are different as well, so they are complementary rather than competitive. Hainan will not pose a severe challenge or threat to Hong Kong.
Ling laid out 2 phases for Hainan to fulfill its commitments. By 2025, the region will focus on liberalization and facilitation of trade, investment, and an island-wide special customs supervision regime. By 2035, they will focus on relevant institutional arrangements to develop a free trade port at a high level with unimpeded flow of cross-border capital, personnel, goods, and data. CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, the Italian city of Milan has launched a set of initiatives to retain some of the environmental benefits of the COVID-19 lockdown. Amongst them is a project to cut car use and with it pollution. With more on this, here's CGTN's Mikhail Mardavid.
In Milan, as in many other cities, the impact of COVID-19 had some environmental benefits. As thousands stayed home during the lockdown period, car traffic was reduced by about 75%, and air pollution decreased visibly.
Abbiamo analizzato I dati dell'inquinamento.
We analysed the pollution data. We had a sharp 2/3 decrease in the pollution of benzene and nitrogen oxides, which are pollutants produced mainly by cars.
The city's deputy mayor in charge of mobility adds that before the pandemic hit, over 1 million citizens traveled daily using the subway. But with social distancing likely for months,
or choose to come to Milan by car, it would mean that we'd suffocate from pollution. We must therefore think of ways of moving that is sustainable in terms of the virus, but also sustainable for traffic and the environment. This is the challenge.
These changes pushed the city to launch the Strade a Parte plan, which translates as open roads.
The project is based on a new cycle route design throughout most of the city. It is intended to be carried out with minimal signage that can be implemented quickly.
Instead of reconstructing pavements, roads will simply be widened for pedestrians and cyclists with a new strip of paint, making the process both time and cost-effective. The aim is to build 35 kilometers of cycle paths by the end of the year. A speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour has also been imposed for greater pedestrian safety. Officials believe the plan will revive Milan while also nurturing the environment. Mikhail Bardavid, CGTN.
And on that note, let's take a quick look at commodity markets today. Oil prices climbing slightly today. That's after major producers agreed to extend a deal on record output cuts to the end of July. Brent has nearly doubled so far since OPEC agreed in April to cut supply by 9.7 million barrels per day during May to June. Now, gold prices, on the other hand, slipped as an unexpected improvement in U.S. jobs numbers did help to boost optimism about an economic recovery. And that, of course, boosted risk appetite in the market and dented the appeal of the safe haven metal. Last week, gold did drop about 2.4%, and that's its third consecutive weekly drop. Well, let's take a short break now, still to come on the show. We take a hike up one of the 7 natural wonders of the world in South Africa. And Kenya's capital, Nairobi, takes a fresh approach to urban development.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, let's go to South Africa now, where one of the 7 natural wonders of the world is now welcoming back tourists. Table Mountain National Park has been closed for weeks now due to the national lockdown. Well, CGTN's Travis Andrews caught up with some of the visitors who are flocking back to the national park.
It's a view that is famous around the world, but for the last few weeks, Cape Townians could only enjoy it from the comfort of their homes. But that's at least until now. The Table Mountain National Park has been reopened due to the lowering of lockdown restrictions, and visitors have been descending on this majestic mountain in their numbers. For some, it's been a long time coming.
It was amazing. It was good to be out for the first time, and it was very quiet, but it was so peaceful and really good. You don't have to, I don't know. You can keep your distance and be cautious with your masks, I guess, each time you pass people.
And with such a huge mountain range to explore, it is one place where social distancing can certainly be adhered to.
Everybody is happy that we can exercise again, we can go out. So on the other hand, masks are compulsory. So in the last 3 or 4 months, if anybody watched the news, it has been drummed into keep your distance, wear a mask, well, sanitize and all the spiel. Now everybody is happy to be out here.
But authorities are keeping a close eye on the mandatory wearing of masks so that everyone can be kept safe. And the string of good weather days has also kept the trails busy. Now, Table Mountain's reopening has also become a key hotspot for tourists while waiting for the skies to reopen.
Came here for holiday for 2.5 weeks, and then with the lockdown, I'm been stuck here for 3 months. I'm waiting for a flight. I've heard a lot about this walk, and today being a perfect day to do the walk. So we came all the way from Camps Bay, and we did that for to enjoy it. The weather is perfect, so.
For now, the Table Mountain Cableway station still remains closed, but there are many routes to the top. All it takes is a bit of effort. And with views like this, it's easy to see why so many people are drawn to this beloved icon of the city. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Now, for decades, infrastructure changes in Kenya have been targeting motorists in the country. But with the reality of COVID-19 now setting in, the capital, Nairobi, is resetting its approach to urban development. CGTN's Robert Nagila reports.
Many of the streets in Nairobi have some form of construction going on. Kenya's capital is receiving a long overdue makeover with the needs of pedestrians and cyclists as a priority. The works being undertaken by the local and national governments seeks to achieve two things: elevate Nairobi's infrastructure to international standards and make it easier for the public to follow social distancing guidelines. Dozens of parking spaces have disappeared, and in their place, new wide pedestrian walkways and cycling lanes. A new authority, the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, established by the president, has been mandated to rehabilitate the capital with a military man at its helm.
I have been given almost 23 items to accomplish. Some have been given 100 days to showcase that they are implementable, and we have already started.
And with military precision, the capital is slowly being transformed. Beginning with the central business district, the new walkways and cycling lanes will cover about 100 kilometers and have provisions for people with disabilities. The authority was established after the city's flamboyant governor was charged with corruption.
He has legal challenges. He cannot execute some of those functions, and that's why some of these functions have been handed over.
And plans are also underway to upgrade informal settlements. The president is personally overseeing the rehabilitation. CCTV footage has emerged of President Kenyatta inspecting the changes during a dusk-to-dawn curfew. As the government fights to control the spread of the pandemic, it's also using this period to bring about much-needed change to improve the quality of life. Robert Magila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, before we leave you today, let's check in on Africa's currencies first. South Africa's rand stayed near an 11-week high. It looks set to mark its sixth straight session of gains. The currency tested a break below 16.8 rand per dollar earlier today, but of course, poor data from China did hamper its progress. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling was firm due to stable dollar demand from importers and, of course, an increase in hard currency reserves from its central bank, which, of course, boosted sentiment towards the currency today. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.